scenario that we were just talking about with the
electrician that got zapped.
Yeah. So it says, imagine that you're Merton, so you're the lady who just got the phone call, and it's time for your 9 o'clock meeting with the CEO and the supervisor. What position would you advocate in that meeting? So essentially, would you fire the supervisor or would you not? And why?
It depends on the guy's history. He's a supervisor. Does he have a record of accidents that happened on his shift, or is this a first-time thing? If it's a first-time thing, I wouldn't fire him, but if it's repeatable, then yeah.
Well, I think, did they say like this happened one time before, or maybe a different supervisor did it and they were just like, we really need to be strict so that people know we're not going to tolerate it. So I get that.
Like maybe a suspension.
Yeah, but I think like firing him is a little extreme. I think if anything, that'll hurt the company because then they will have to find someone else. And he's well liked by all his like employees. So yeah, I think like looking at him as overall.
I mean, yeah, I think it's definitely a written offense, sort of thing. Like, you know, put a note in the guy's file. Trust me, that counts. Especially when you can promote from within, and that's in their file. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like he certainly needs to be reprimanded, but and some action being taken. But firing, I don't know. If, in my opinion, if there were like multiple errors and problems, then yes. But if this is maybe the first, you know. So I just pulled up the memo here, and it says. Stepan Sick, I don't know how you say that, is a good supervisor. His crew is one of my best, but this is the third incident like this in the last year. He never should have sent Olsen out there without taking some precautions. I've warned him several times, but he just hasn't gotten the message. I think it's time to make it clear that safety violations won't be tolerated. I think Ned should be fired.
Okay.
So it sounds like it's the third time this year. And he has been verbally warned. Okay. Well, maybe he needs more than a verbal warning. Yeah. Maybe he needs something like, I don't know, not suspension, but maybe a pay cut or something that would actually like affect him.
Training.
Yeah.
Training on safety.
Or yeah, you're not able to come back to work until you do this training, and or maybe have some kind of like set up like 3 strikes you're out kind of deal, you know, so he knows like his job's on the line, where it's not just, you know, slap on the wrist, don't do that anymore, but where there's actual consequences involved.
Yeah, I really like written reprimand and suspension until training is accomplished, and then he has to sign something saying, yes, I understand that these are the procedures, and another accident is grounds for immediate termination.
Yeah, I agree. He definitely needs some more before. I guess this is the end. Like they said, he really is a good supervisor, but I think he needs to understand the importance of the safety.
Well, it's like he's well liked. Is he well liked because he lets people slack off on the rules?
That's true.
Yeah, but I think that can also help just the fact that he is well liked, because if they change his mindset, then he can influence all his workers since they like him and trust him. But that could not work.
If you wanted to make it really poetic, during his suspension, you would put him in charge of doing trainings for other people so he can learn it over and over and over again.
That's actually a really good idea.
Shelby, I'm really glad Shelby, you are amazing.
I have children who are barrel.
I'm really glad I'm not your kid.
Oh, you guys have seen all the forms. Guess what I have? Decent food and a clean house.
You're awesome.
It's all my sister. I'm a complete hudge. I'm eating on a recorded thing and I still don't care. I'm like, whatever, I'm busy. I gotta go shopping today.
Oh my gosh. You crack me up.
Okay, so going on to the next question, we're not gonna do the whole group things.
So just tell me where to scroll,
So scroll down to this step 3, the discussion. So we'll just skip this thing and we'll just answer the questions that are past it. So it says the first group, you should discover that safety goes down. Discover that as safety goes down, the number of hours you produce a ton also goes down. So as safety improves over the long run, productivity improves. So are you surprised by this finding?
Not particularly, and it's because it's something my sister said. And she goes, when in manufacturing, you have 2 options. You can have scheduled outages or unscheduled outages. And the unscheduled outages are much, much more expensive, not to mention dangerous for people. And I think with training, it's the same way. You can either have scheduled work stoppages because you're doing training and you're, checking up on these people. You can either slow down your work or the whole plant can shut down when someone gets hit by a forklift.
Mm-hmm.
Which one's more expensive?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking back so I grew up in the country and I grew up on a farm and worked potato harvest and that. And it's so true that when you have those breakdowns, they seem to last so much longer than the time it would have taken to do the maintenance on the equipment beforehand or just double check everything before. And so it makes sense that your productivity increases when you take the time to do those maintenance reviews or those safety reviews like you're supposed to.
Yeah, and I think too, if you're, even if you're allowing people to take breaks or whatever, take care of themselves, that's going to save you more time than if someone gets hurt or overworked and then they can't work for a week, then you're completely out. So I think, maintenance on people, ensuring that they're okay is of course going to help because then they're healthy to work better.
Yeah, I think a lot of employees feel it's obnoxious to do some of these. It takes more time and effort, but and incentivizing it I don't know. I'm thinking they don't see the results. Maybe they see saving time, on the front end, but on the back end, they sometimes lose sight of the bigger picture of safety.
And it's like you tell your kids, do it right or do it over. Because Twisted Metal doesn't care what your excuse was.
Yeah.
Well, and I agree that I think all of the workers need to know the numbers attached to it. Because they were complaining about the speed limits being reduced on the forklifts. But do they know that it saved them, 30% on their repair costs and their breakdown time? Do they know that these measures actually increase productivity? Because if they don't, then they're still going to drag their feet about it.
I'm actually just thinking about the other thing that they paired it with this week, the motivation, the class reading. And kind of, what did they say in the motivation reading is that helping people see the bigger part of the whole is motivating. And so I think you can use this here. How does safety help them? I mean, why can't they, in their training or whatever, why can't they show, here's the industry averages of people getting hurt. Here's our averages. They're lower, and they've been lower for 20 years. Here's why. So your missing finger doesn't happen. Your broken arm doesn't happen. You getting hit by a forklift doesn't happen. And I think to show them, we're spending all this money to keep you guys safe so we can all go home. I think maybe helping. I think maybe getting them the bigger part, giving them a bigger part of the picture, as opposed to what they're normally doing. That I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Are we on number 6? Because that's a really funny question. No.
No. Right. I was just trying to see if there's anything else on this step 3 section.
Oh, step 3 section. Other way.
Okay, so which type of problem do you think is easiest to solve? The ones that are expensive or the ones that involve people's behavior?
Expensive is definitely easier.
Yeah.
That's just money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Modifying behavior is
there's no quick fix.
Right.
You can't buy your way into instant motivation.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like this company's having a problem with their employees having the tough guy attitude. Like, to work here, I have to be tough. And so they're willing to put safety on the line so that they can, I guess, do the dangerous things. So how would you go about changing that behavior or that attitude that a lot of the workers have?
I think some consequences. Well, there's the natural consequences, but in this case, when the company would be liable for these, there has to be some kind of accountability and consequences. If you're not following protocol, you're out. You cannot work here if you choose to do that. And I don't know, that's just my opinion, where you have to have some kind of accountability and some kind of structure there.
Yeah, I think in culture, because behavior is the biggest problem they're overcoming. They already have they've already spent the millions of dollars to physically improve the plant, to set up the walkways and the protected areas and re-engineering their process flows to avoid injury. They've already done all of the monetary stuff. Culture is the only thing they have to do left. And so, because it's a culture thing, how do you change a culture? And honestly, the way we got it going right now, usually ridicule. That tends to be our first, what we do in the society. We tend to ridicule people who don't agree with the prevailing culture. Not that I'm saying we should do that, but that is clearly what these people respond to. Every culture exists as a subset of a culture in which they reside. So yeah, these guys are big, tough guys because they're working at an aluminum plant, and they're probably in a rough guy area of the country. I mean, there's San Francisco rugged, which isn't rugged. And then there's, Arizona desert rugged, which is definitely more rugged. So what kind of culture are we working with, and what parts of those culture can we use to connect with this subculture in this company? Ouch.
And I think this is a really tough problem that they're facing, is getting past the culture that's within the work environment.
This actually reminds me of, just 1 second. My laundry is going and it's really loud. Hey, Annie, can you shut the laundry door, please? It reminds me of my dad. He worked at 2 different power plants here in Arizona. One is a coal-powered power plant in northern Arizona, and then a nuclear power plant, which is here in the Phoenix Valley area, and tons of safety protocol in these, because my dad was dealing with nuclear reactors and highly radioactive materials and stuff like that. So you don't mess around with this stuff. And I feel like what you were saying, Olivia, these guys who come in with this tough guy attitude, to me it feels like that tough guy attitude would be in the younger guys. And I feel like if there is a culture, it will come from the top down, from those who are experienced in this and who have been with the company and who know that safety is super important. And so if somehow they can kind of draw from that, from these, I would think, and I'm thinking men, not just men work at this, but that's just serious gender, classification, but anyone who works in this company, but has experience and knows how important safety is, and maybe has some scare stories, like of how, what happened. My dad, the plant that he worked at in Northern Arizona, the coal plant, one of my friend's dad died because of something that happened on the job. He was killed, and it was terrible. I mean, our whole town was, shook up, and it was awful. And so even some, maybe some background and some real culture, like you said, Olivia, just getting the young guys or the young one, the tough guys to realize this is super important, and have it come from those who are more experienced in this work, and who, and as a management, seeking those people out who are the rule followers and using them as an example, and to teach, and to be, maybe even start the mentoring thing that we talked about in the other class, having mentors, safety mentors, or I don't know, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but there's certainly some experience there that can be drawn upon, I think, to help cultivate that culture of safety. Sorry.
Well, and I think going back to the first, that scenario that we talked about with them wanting to fire the supervisor, is I think that's kind of along the lines that they're looking at, that this guy is a person who's in authority, people look up to him, but if he's asking his employees to go against safety protocols, then that's really dangerous, because it's spreading that safety is an important attitude farther through the company. And I think that's what they're looking for, is like to stop it where it's at, and hopefully replace him with someone who, either help him change his attitude or replace him with someone who does have that safety oriented attitude.
Yeah, I can, now that you mentioned that, from that perspective, I could totally see why the guy wanted to fire him. This is a supervisor who is who is intentionally endangering his employees because he knows better. Do you want him over employees? Like, that's kind of worrisome. Which is why I think maybe the suspension and the transferring him over to the training division, where he can have those things burned into his eyelids.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, to start change in the culture, I would think that it starts, like, with the supervisors doing things a certain way, and everyone follows that. And so from that, I can see that supervisor is really important in influencing the employees. And if he's making that culture like, oh, we don't need to care as much about that, like, it's not a big deal, then everyone's going to pick up on that. And the people that are, the employees that do care about safety and want to follow the rules, then probably don't, they're not really talked to, they're just probably not, like, looked up to, and no one cares that they want to follow the rules.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like they've got this, they've got the mentality, like, they talk about the OSHA cowboy in the reading, and it's the joke of, like, someone wearing all the protective gear they're supposed to be wearing is ridiculed and ostracized. They're called, like, the OSHA cowboy. My brother-in-law actually is a health and safety officer for a chemical manufacturing company in Minnesota. And so I've kind of seen a little bit up close, kind of what he's had to do to teach people, here's how you don't die. And he's got some spectacular stories. Sulfuric acid. They found on one of their sites, they found a buried diesel fuel tank from, like, the 1920s. Because that's where they've been. Of course, it's completely unsafe and has been leaking. That whatever they had in it into the ground. It wasn't a diesel, it was a chemical tank. But now in other areas around in that area, they found that same poison and they don't know where it's coming from, and then they found the tank. I mean, it's not their fault. They bought the property after it was buried there and no one knew. But it's like a little poison archaeological dig, and that's why we have safety.
Yeah. So let's talk about number 6 now. Do you personally follow safety procedures in your life?
I do not do a single thing on this list. I kept hoping that one was going to come up, but it didn't.
I usually always wear my seatbelt. That's just like a habit.
I wear my seatbelt.
I'd like to be thrown from the car. Thank you very much.
We had a family homemaking lesson about texting. The church put out some really funny, but like, engaging videos about texting and driving and safety stuff. It's actually kind of fun.
Cool.
Like a kid who's eating a hamburger while he's driving, and he just goes off in thought about this juicy, yummy hamburger, and then almost hits, a cat or something. They're really funny. And the girl putting on makeup, and she's, goes off into the glamour, like, dream, of her walking down the runway, and she almost gets in a car crash or whatever. They're super funny. I'll have to find them, and maybe I can find them and put them in the link. But it helped. We talked about it with my kids. Like, no, we don't text and drive. So,
yeah.
So why do you think it is that you don't follow these safety procedures? Like,
well, yeah, I think people get hit by buses or forklifts, as the case may be. Let's see. Okay, so last week, my sister became an OSHA reportable. And it wasn't even a small one. So they work at this large scale agriculture.
Sorry, guys.
Oh, you're actually, okay, that's Drowsy Driver. Oh, okay.
Sorry, no, I'll go back. Where am I?
So last week they're spraying down, there was this chemical that they were hosing down the floors with, right, for sanitation purposes. And in liquid form, this thing's fine, but in vaporized form, it's dangerous, and you're supposed to mark off the area, and no one's supposed to walk through there for 4 hours. And there's cameras everywhere, and so they're spraying this using a pesticide applicator, the gallon thing that you pump and you have the hose and you spray. Okay, so it's vaporized, right? So they laid that down at 10:25. They didn't mark it. It was a hallway, widely used. And 2 minutes later, my sister walked into that hallway.
Oh.
So they gassed her, and she made it to the end of the hallway before the camera shows her lurching off into another room and throwing up into a sink. So she was repeatedly vomiting for at least an hour afterwards, just holding a bucket. She was transported. Someone from work drove her to the urgent care center, which is neither urgent nor care. And she had to go home, and she didn't really regain her strength for like 3 days.
Wow.
So at the end of the week meeting that she's in, they're like, and we have our first OSHA reportable. Thank you, Lauren. And I'm like, but it's all on camera, so you can tell that it wasn't labeled, it wasn't taped off, none of the things were followed, and she got gassed. And it's their company's first OSHA report.
wow.
So yeah, it doesn't even have to be like big aluminum smelting stuff. It can be an agriculture facility.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good example. Wow.
Okay.
So this list that they have, like seatbelts, don't text on dangerous places, like cross at the crosswalks. So they're all like safety procedures that we're all expected to follow. But like we all said, there's some that we don't follow.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we follow them? Like, what's your...
Because we're proud and we think we are invincible.
I think it's just a risk reward calculation. People do hundreds of these every day. Is the time I'm going to waste putting on this thing likely to protect me from something that is not likely to happen? Basically, why would I spend this now if I don't actually think that the bad thing's going to happen? Because no one ever thinks it can happen to them until they walk through a hallway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I know that I used to have trouble when I would drive to school getting my younger brother to wear a seatbelt. And I would always, like, stop in the middle of the road on the way and be like, oh my God.
Oh, seatbelt check? I do that too.
But one day on our way to school, we had a head-on collision at 45 miles an hour. And because he was wearing his seatbelt, we both walked away without a scratch. But the kid that hit us wasn't wearing his seatbelt, and he hit the windshield and got glass in his eye and dislocated a shoulder. And, like, I've seen my brother's attitude change towards seatbelts because of that. And I think that a lot of times when we don't follow the safety procedures, because it's like what Shelby said, you know, we see it as, well, it's not likely to happen, and it's never happened to me before. But then the one time that it does happen, then all of a sudden you wake up and you realize how important it is. So, but I think that's the problem that they have in this plant, is that if the people who, like, they have injuries quite often, but it's such a big plant and there's thousands of employees that a lot of the employees probably don't know personally someone who's gotten hurt. And when you know someone personally that's gotten hurt from, like, not obeying those safety regulations, I think it hits closer to home.
Yeah, I think it makes it more real of a possibility. You're like, oh, that does happen to people. But I think too, like, part of it is convenience. You know, we're always in a rush trying to get places. We don't think about we don't necessarily think about all the risks and consequences that come when we sit down in the car and we need to go somewhere. So I think it's definitely on our part to put, like, importance in that.
Yeah, I think our culture has absolutely proven that convenience trumps everything.
Mm-hmm.
We will kill children to maintain our convenience. That's how far gone we are on the convenience train. And so this is just a symptom of that. It's a culture of convenience, and safety isn't convenient.
Mm-hmm.
Ask any mom trying to keep her kid out of a busy road with cars driving by.
Well, and I think as we also go along with that it's we fall into the habit of, we did it once and we were okay and nothing happened. So then we do it again and then it becomes a habit. And so I'm sure that's what happened in the plant that we're talking about as well, that they probably have done it once or twice without following the safety procedures, and like, oh, well, nothing happened. And so it's that it's starting to become a habit if you don't catch it the first time they do it.
Actually,
Yeah, that's a good point.
Let's see, which one helps companies get to its goals? I was actually looking at question 8. It's like, are there ways to involve the communities or families? And I hadn't actually thought of that. How can you get the families on board? I mean, that's actually your easiest group, because the families don't care how much steel or how much aluminum the company makes or whatnot. Mm-hmm. They want their person home at the end of the day with all his fingers. So how would you get the families in? Huh.
Yeah, to make them, make the workers think.
Yeah.
Again, I'm thinking about men, wives, making them follow safety protocol, but it could be the other way around.
Let's see. Yeah. So I mean,
it could even go back to what we learned about the training games and remember the Dilbert, like some kind of fun, like engaging campaign where it's not, today we're talking about safety, the Charlie Brown rah, 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 rah. Where it's funny, like, they can kind of joke about it in an appropriate way, you know, if that's okay. Because I remember saying some situations it's not okay to joke about it, but there's got to be an approach that would be effective, and maybe even have some kind of like, I don't know, if some family get together about safety, or like bring your kid to work day, and you know, let your kid wear the helmet, the hard hat, and the safety goggles and the stuff, and show them what you do, you know, if it's safe for them to do that. And or maybe have, you know, like dirty jobs, like some TV, you know, bring them in and show this this aluminum plant and how the safety procedures they have to follow, you know, get them on TV. They would be excited to be on camera, don't you think? I don't know, just there's got to be some other ways.
Yeah, that would be, what's it called? I was thinking, what about like incentives? Like, you know, they talk about monetary incentives not working out for creative jobs, but that's not what we're dealing with here. We are dealing with those road tasks that incentives do work on. What if at the, I almost want to say like the people wearing the gear and then like their supervisors, basically like, hey, the top 3 groups with the most improved safety record get X prize.
Yeah, like I like that.
Yeah, so that way it wouldn't be like if someone has a really bad safety thing, if someone has a really high one, that this one's going to get it. No, you're going to be measuring the improvement between the two, or the improvement against themselves. So it's not a competition with that group over there. It is how much can you improve yourself.
Right. Yeah, I like that.
I was also thinking about, okay, so my brother-in-law as health and safety officer, he basically, they professionally produced some new training videos, like safety and training videos, but these are hilarious. I'm not kidding. Y'all know the inflatable T-Rex?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so he has one of those, awesome. And this T-Rex, like, they had like a little name badge with T-Rex on it, and like, so he's talking and he's being his cute little da-da-da-da-da, and then there's the T-Rex coming behind him doing the wrong thing that he's talking about, and then he like goes and like smack the head of the T-Rex and like, oh, and they'll like take the garbage can back in, because like one of them was like, don't prop open doors, right? And so while he's talking, the T-Rex is doing it, and then T-Rex walks by, he looks at him and slaps his face and goes, oh, and then he goes and takes it back out of the door and puts it back where it's supposed to be.
That's fun. Are they on YouTube? Or are they just
not? They're private, but you want to know what? I want to see. I'll see if I can get them. I'll see if I can find them.
That would be fun.
They're really funny.
Yeah, I like that. Like adding some like humor to it. You know, that doesn't have to be as serious. Like, it is serious and it should be taken serious, but you know, make it a fun.
Maybe that's the problem. I mean, they were talking about in motivation, even in one of the quizzes, if you can use humor, do so, because it's more likely the person will remember it. They'll share it with other people. Yeah, humor. Okay, if you're not doing a safety video with humor, you're doing it wrong. Because this is always like, what is the stereotype of the safety officer that everyone has? The OSHA cowboy who's dull, boring, and dry, and the accountants can't even stand to talk to him.
Yeah.
So why is like, if you can do something to break the mold or to show something new, people will instinctively and subconsciously listen to you more. Mission accomplished.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about, so they have a draft that they came up with for their safety plan for the next year. And so it's a 6-step plan. The first step is monitor complete implementation of recommendations on falls. So establish reporting procedures and provide detailed tracking and report.
So is that on your, Olivia, where's that at?
That is in the document.
It's back there.
It's like on page 21.
Okay, sorry. I was trying to see if I could pull it up while you're talking about it.
Okay. So I'll just read it because it's pretty short. 2, they're supposed to conduct stage 3 training for all supervisors and lead operators. 3, publish a biweekly newsletter on safety in plant. 4, improve safety committee operations, better information, train the committee leaders. 5, establish safety recognition program, so awards and dinner based on performance improvement. And then 6, meet with superintendents on a monthly basis to review safety performance, improve the meetings and the monthly reports. So what do you think should be kept in their report, and what do you think they need to change in their plan for the next year?
I don't know. The plan is actually really convoluted. I mean, if we're looking at the exhibits, that might be easier.
Yeah, it's Exhibit 11. It's on page 21 of the document.
I'm coming.
Yeah. So,
Right here. This one right here.
Yeah. So that is the plan for the next year.
Right here too.
So this is her plan that she's supposed to present. That's supposed to reduce their number of safety.
Establish safety recognition program. Awards and based on performance. Yeah.
Yeah, safety recognition. That's kind of what we talked about. What you suggested, Shelby.
My brother-in-law actually does a newsletter for his company. He's the one that writes it. He's got this cute little cartoon that he always puts with it of like how like this one, someone violating the safety thing and like how he fixes it. And yeah, it's actually pretty funny.
So I think like in there they could include, make sure to use some humor in the newsletter, because if they're boring, then a lot of people are just gonna throw them away.
Who would read them?
Yeah.
No one reads newsletters anyway. You don't have something fun in there, your readership is going to be 0.
Yeah.
It's like the same reason why some people get the newspaper. They only get it for the funny section.
Yeah.
But they'll look at a couple of headlines on their way to it.
Yeah, and let's face it, these are guys working in an aluminum smelting plant. I think they're the kind of guy who gets the paper for the funny.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe the sports section.
Yeah, I was gonna say something that they're interested in at least. Like, maybe it doesn't have. I mean, maybe it doesn't have to be super funny, but at least it can be relatable.
Yeah. Well, and I think including like upcoming company events, because I know that when I worked at Melaleuca, they would have like a big family picnic, and so that was something that when they sent out their company letter, that they had the dates of when the company activities were that all the employees were invited to.
And I think if you're going to have if you're going to have an event where you're handing out like safety awards or whatever, you need to invite the whole family so that all the wives can say, hey, I want the $100 gift card. Wear your gloves. Like, we can make culture work for us. That's fine.
Yeah.
Safety performance, improve the meetings, and then okay, so number 6, it's like meet with superintendents on a monthly basis to review safety performance, improve the meetings and the monthly reports. Improve. I understand that's your goal. How? What is your plan to improve? Because this is like the bullet point. How are we improving? Like, we can't break this down anymore. How are we improving? Improve better information. I mean, even in number 4, it says improve safety committee operations with better information, train committee leaders at crew level, which is true and fine and good. But with 6, it's just there's no metrics and there's no action plan. So it's just a wish.
So for that, like we could add some of the action plans that we talked about. Because like we said, like the superintendents need to make sure that the superintendents have that safety-based attitude so that it goes down through the hierarchy.
I'm sorry, repeat that last.
Oh, I was just saying that, like we talked about before, that we have to make sure that each of the leaders have that level of that they care about safety. So we need to be doing like evaluations on the superintendents to make sure they're being like following the safety procedures and promoting them so that we know that it's going down through the rest of the workers.
Yeah, but I also am worried, or I'm concerned about human error. That is, as I've learned about process and things like that from my sister, human error is the lazy man's excuse. Because if you're in safety, if you're in process, if you're in compliance, the person did it wrong is never the answer. Because the question after that in root cause analysis is, why could the person physically do that if it's not supposed to be done? And so then it becomes a process and a machinery. It's like, what about our procedures allowed this to happen? And honestly, you kind of saw the same thing. And like, remember okay, so no one remembers it. Do you guys remember the histories of like plane crashes in the 70s and 80s? Especially the 70s. So, the plane crashes, the NTSB comes out and investigates, and all of their reports said the same thing: human error, human error, human error. And then in like the later 80s and 90s, I started thinking, are we sure? Are we sure it's not just a plane exploding? Are we sure it's not just a mechanical failure? And so then they started saying, okay, why could he do this thing that made the plane stall or whatnot? And it's because, so why could he do that? Actually led them to the actual root cause, and then airline safety drastically improved in the 90s.
So like making sure they evaluate the, I guess every time there's an injury, making sure they're evaluating what allowed it to happen.
Yeah, where was the gap in the procedure? If the procedure wasn't followed, that's one thing. You can say that's human error, and that's kind of what we have here. But then again, why could he do that?
Oh, did we lose Jesse?
Oh, I think we did.
Oh no.
So, okay, so yeah. Do we have anything else we need to talk about other than the doohickey for this discussion?
I don't think so. I mean, that's basically it. I mean, I guess just what did you learn about talking about safety in the workplace? That's the last thing we need to talk about.
Oh, I think she's back.
Oh, hey, Jessica. You're back, Jesse.
That is a cute picture.
Well, what did I learn?
Yeah, her camera's not back up yet, but
yeah,
I think she can either see or hear us.
It's really important. I feel like this isn't something to be taken lightly. And I feel like the doohickey paper, that's certainly one of the issues we need to address. I know there's like all those different problems, but this one I feel like is right up there for sure. And you're going to do that one, right?
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm doing the training and workplace safety. Yeah. So yeah, I'm sure that's going to be. There's an interview letter. Why am I getting all right? So we're going to go to Drive. We're going to go. Hey, we can stop the recording if we want.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're good on.
Stop.